Ay, ay.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Jennifer Burdick. I'm here from Community Legal Services. I want to thank everyone for joining us for this webinar entitled Helping Philadelphians Access Stimulus Payments and the Child Tax Credit. I'm here with other presenters today, Cecile Cow from the Paralegal in CLS's Medical Legal Partnership, Taylor Keat, a social worker and tax expert in our SSI unit, and Graham O'Neill, the Director of Partnerships at Campaign for Working Families. We are going to do a few things in this webinar today. The first is we need to give you a quick and dirty overview on the new tax credits available from the IRS. In general, these tax credits, which come in the form of advanced economic stimulus payments and in the future will be expanded advanced child tax credits, represent a substantial expansion to the social safety net. Cecile is going to provide an overview of the 3 stimulus payments, providing individual people up to $4,400 to assist in hardship related to the pandemic. Taylor is going to discuss the expanded child tax credit, which will afford most families between $3,000 and $3,600 in payments, some of them advanced per child in the household. These advanced tax credits are substantial. Policy analysts expect that this, particularly the expanded child tax credit, has the potential to cut child poverty in half and could lift up to 9.9 million children either up to the poverty line or above the poverty line. This is a really, really big deal. The problem is these benefits are currently hard to access. They flow through the IRS, and the IRS is really terrific at interacting and communicating with taxpayers. The problem is there's a lot of people that are not taxpayers, and there my cat flew, so apologies for that. Either because they don't have income, so they don't have to file, or they get disability benefits like SSI or Social Security disability or veterans benefits and don't have tax filing disability. Because of that, there are a lot of people who are not currently interacting with the IRS and who the IRS is not well positioned to help get these payments out to. There are free tax services available. And one reason we're really thrilled that Graham O'Neill can be with us today is he's from Campaign for Working Families, which is the largest free tax prep provider in the Philadelphia and I think kind of this whole region. But these services were not prepared with this in mind. Nobody knew that the American Rescue Plan was going to happen or the 2 other acts that gave these stimulus benefits. And nobody knew that getting these benefits was going to essentially hinge on getting lots and lots of people who have never needed to file taxes before into the tax system, which is why it's so important that you're here with us today. We are going, after giving you an overview on these really amazing, like kind of once in a lifetime credits, we're going to talk to you about ways that people can get assistance filing taxes this year. And it's not seamless and it's not simple because, as we said, these systems were not designed for this purpose. But with your help, we think we can do what we need to do to get as many people into the system as possible and get the benefits that everyone needs. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Cecile to start the presentation.
Taylor.
Sorry, I was muted. Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon.
You in the bathroom?
Taylor, can you mute yourself? Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the training. I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen, and I think this should work. Can you guys all see that? Okay. Okay, so as Jen mentioned, this training is going to be on the new IRS advanced credits, which includes the CTC, the child tax credits, and the stimulus payments, and also how to connect people to free tax preparation services. I will be talking about the first part of the training, which is focused on the stimulus payments, also known as the economic impact payments, or EIPs for short. And then Taylor will be talking about the child tax credit. We'll have a small Q&A, and then Jen will be talking about how to file taxes and how to connect people to free tax services. And then we'll have a larger Q&A at the end. So we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so about a year ago, the world completely changed with the coronavirus pandemic. And in response to the economic fallout, the federal government passed a series of legislation that allowed the IRS to send out stimulus payments to people in America to help with their economic situation, right? And these stimulus payments are known as the economic impact payments, or EIPs for short. The first EIP was issued through the CARES Act, passed on March 27, 2020. This first EIP gave $1,200 for qualifying adult and $500 per qualifying child. And I'll explain what the term qualifying adult and qualifying child means in the next slide. A second EIP was issued through another act, the COVID-related Tax Relief Act, passed on December 28, 2020. And that was a little bit smaller in terms of the amount. It was $600 per qualifying child and $600 per qualifying adult. The third EIP was issued through the American Rescue Plan that was passed on March 11th, 2021, less than a month ago, and that increased the amounts of the EIPs to $1,400 per qualifying adult and the same amount per qualifying dependent. And if you notice, for the third EIP, the language changed from qualifying child to now qualifying dependent, and I'll explain what that means. But if you quickly look at all the three EIPs 1, 2, and 3, this means that a family of 4, right, in which all members are eligible, could get over $11,000 in cash payments. And for a lot of our clients who are low income or have no income, this is really a rare opportunity to get such a huge sum of money through the federal government. So this is a very, very big deal. So who actually qualifies for these EIPs? So for all three EIPs, if you are an adult with a valid Social Security number that's valid for work, that is not claimed as a dependent in a tax household, you could get EIPs 1, 2, and 3. Now, the reason why I have the word tax household underlined is because, as I mentioned earlier, these stimulus payments are structured as advanced tax credit on tax filings. So the IRS is the one that is issuing out these stimulus payments. So it's structured as an advanced tax credit. So you have to file taxes, and the people who are eligible are the ones that are in the tax household. And that's why you have to file taxes in order to get the EIPs. For EIPs 1 and 2, there's a specific requirement that only qualifying children or a qualifying child can get EIPs 1 and 2. And that means if you are a dependent in a tax household under the age of 17, as of December 31st, 2020, you could get EIPs 1 and 2. So unfortunately, if you have a dependent on your tax household that is age 17 or older, say a college student, or a dependent adult on your tax household, they would not be eligible for EIPs 1 and 2, unfortunately. That changed for EIP 3. For EIP 3, all dependents, regardless of age, are eligible. So in the first scenario where you had a dependent child who was 17 or older, not being eligible for EIPs 1 and 2, they could now get $1,400 for EIP 3. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about EIP 1. So if you look at the income limits for EIP 1, you can see it's pretty high. That means a lot of middle-class families are eligible for EIP 1. EIP 1 is based on the income that you filed either on 2018 or 2019 tax return. It's also based on what's called a non-filer return. If you recall from last year, the IRS created a non-filer portal that allowed people who didn't file taxes in 2018 or 2019 and who had no intention of filing taxes because it's a kind of complicated process, to instead go to their website and use a non-filer form to file taxes in a way in order to get the stimulus payment. So that non-filer portal is no longer in existence, but it was a few months ago and allowed people who don't normally file a tax return to get the stimulus payments. The IRS also used data from Social Security Administration, veterans benefits, and also railroad retirement benefits as well. So people who were getting SSI or SSD or VA benefits could also get the stimulus payments automatically from the IRS. There were some issues with payments being sent out timely, but nonetheless, the IRS relied on data from SSA. Okay, now for people who were actually over the income limits for the first EIP, they could still get partial amounts. And as you can see here, the partial amounts, the limits for that, it's pretty high. The way it's calculated is for every $100 above a limit, your stimulus payment, $5 of it is deducted. So you could still get a portion of the stimulus payment, even if your income was above the normal income limits. For the first EIP, if you were a mixed status household, meaning that members in your family have different immigration status. So let's use an example of a family of 4 or a family of 3, actually, where the child has Social Security number, is a US citizen. One parent has a green card, has an SSN, but the other parent does not have a green card and does not have an SSN. In that scenario for EIP 1, the child with the SSN and the one parent with the green card would not have been eligible for EIP 1. So that was something that was a little bit frustrating for EIP 1, was that every single person had to have an SSN for any member of that household to be eligible. If one person didn't have an SSN, then the entire tax household was not eligible. The good thing is this was changed later on in EIP 2, which I'll talk about now. So for EIP 2, the income limits were pretty much the same as EIP 1. So the 75,000 and so forth, that was the same for EIP 1 and 2. The partial payments was phased out at lower income levels. And you can see here, I have the numbers listed for the phasing out of the partial payments. EIP 2 was also based on 2019 tax returns and also the non-filer returns, as well as data from SSA, VA, or RRB benefits as well. Now for EIP 2, there was a huge change when it came to immigrant eligibility. This time, a mixed status household could get stimulus payment too, as long as one parent or one spouse has a Social Security number. So what does this mean? In our scenario, in our example of a family of 3, where one parent did not have an SSN, that entire family was not eligible for EIP 1. In this case, for EIP 2, now both the child with an SSN and the parent with the green card and SSN are eligible for EIP 2. But not only that, because this rule is retroactive to the CARES Act, to the first EIP, the one parent with the green card and the child with SSN could also get EIP 1. So this is a great change for EIP 2. You could now get stimulus payments if you have Social Security number, and it goes back to EIP 1. Now, the sad thing about EIP 2, though, is that if there is a parent or a spouse with an ITIN, that member, that parent or spouse was not eligible for EIP 2. And what exactly is an ITIN? Taylor will talk more about an ITIN, but I'm just going to briefly mention that an ITIN stands for Individual Taxpayer Identification Number. It's basically a number that people get who don't have a Social Security number, and they use it to file taxes, essentially. So for EIP 2, if both parents or both spouses have ITINs, then unfortunately the entire family is not eligible. So let's say there's a family where the child has a Social Security number, is a US citizen, but both parents have ITINs, they don't have SSNs. Unfortunately, that child would not have been eligible for EIP 2 and also not eligible for EIP 1 as well. Okay, EIP 3. So EIP 3, same income levels as before, as 1 and 2, but the partial payments are phased out at lower income levels. EIP 3 is based on 2019 or 2020 federal tax return, also based on non-filer returns, as well as data from SSA, VA, or RIB. Now, the big thing about EIP 3 is this change in mixed status household eligibility. So for EIP3, as long as one parent has an I-10, then members of that family who have SSNs are now eligible for the stimulus payment. So in our scenario, again, of a household of 3, where two of the parents have I-10s, that child with an SSN would now be eligible for EIP3 and can get $1,400, whereas the first 2 EIPs, that was not the case. Okay, so what are some key facts about all 3 of the EIPs? So one thing to note, as I mentioned before, the EIPs are structured as advanced tax credits, either advanced tax credits for a 2020 filing or a 2021 filing. These are untaxed and do not have to be paid back. So we get a lot of questions, people asking us, well, what if I file taxes and it turns out that my refund is less or more? Do I have to pay back the stimulus payments? No, you do not have to pay it back. You do not have to pay back any of the stimulus payments. The EIPs also do not count as income for any public benefits, such as Medicaid, medical assistance, food stamps, SNAP, TANF, cash assistance, and SSI. Now, if you don't spend all of your stimulus payments after 12 months, that portion that is not spent, that will be counted as a resource. The other great thing about the EIP is that they are not considered in a public charge determination. So some of you might be familiar with the term public charge. Public charge is basically a term used to describe someone who might be a public charge on society if they were to become a permanent resident. So this public charge determination is used when someone is adjusting their legal status to become a permanent resident. They're getting a green card, and there are very limited government benefits that are used that could be used sort of in a review where many factors are considered. But having had used some type of government benefits could be a negative thing when you're applying for a green card. So these EIPs do not count in a public charge determination. So that's the good thing about the EIPs. Okay, so in terms of the IRS setting out these payments, EIP3, right, that was recently passed, that law, so that is still ongoing. The IRS is still distributing EIP3s, and they're continuing to send payments through the end of 2021. So some people who have not gotten EIP3 yet, maybe they are going to get them, later down the road. For EIPs 1 and 2, however, the government has already finished sending out EIPs 1 and 2. So if someone did not get EIP 1 and 2, they got to file taxes in order to get EIPs 1 and 2. If you want to check on the status of EIP3, you can go to the IRS website, and we have here the website listed. You click on Get My Payment, and you can see whether or not the IRS has sent you EIP3. If you want to check to see if whether EIPs 1 and 2 were sent out, you have to create an IRS account, unfortunately. Clicking on Get My Payment will only show the result for EIP3. You have to create an account to view whether EIP 1 and 2 were sent out by the IRS. Okay, so the big takeaway from this first part of the training is that there are still millions of people out there who have not received their stimulus payments or are missing one of the stimulus payments, right? And the only way now to get the stimulus payments is to file taxes. So, as we've talked about, the rules have changed from EIPs 1, 2, and 3. So someone who might not have been eligible for EIP 1 could have been eligible for EIP 2 or could have been eligible for EIP 3. And that's why we encourage everyone to file taxes, just so you know that, maybe you think that you're not eligible, but actually you are eligible for the other stimulus payments. So I'm going to turn it over now to Taylor, who's going to be talking about the child tax credit.
So can you do me a huge favor and keep sharing your screen, only because I'm on my iPhone? So, okay, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Taylor Keith, and I am a kind of a Swiss Army knife of a social worker at Community Legal. I Army knife in part because I not only handle a lot of the other ancillary issues that the lawyers and paralegals can't handle for SSI clients, I also have this weird repository of tax knowledge because I'm also something called an enrolled agent, which is a type of tax pro that can represent you in front of the IRS at audit. So I'm here today to talk about the expanded child tax credit for 2021. This is a really, really, really big deal. $3,600 for the year for children who are from birth to ages up to age of 6, actually, and then $3,000 for kids between the ages of 6 and 17, 17 being inclusive. So it doesn't stop at 17 like the previous child tax credit did. This credit is fully refundable, meaning fundamentally that there is no need for any kind of earnings to do this. There's no earnings floor. There used to be a minimum earnings floor of $2,500 where you had to have some kind of income to claim the child tax credit. That is gone now. This credit is fully refundable and it fully goes in the pockets of anyone who claims the credit. It is also partially advanced. In other words, the IRS is figuring out a way to deliver up to half of this credit now within the next within the last half of this year, beginning in July. They haven't figured out all the delivery mechanisms as of yet. The plan in theory might be to issue it on a monthly basis, but we don't know all the details as of yet. Experts expect this credit to lift up to 4.1 million children out of poverty in 2021. It cannot be overstated how important it is and how big of a deal this is. So you can go to the next slide. So for the full benefit, the adjusted gross income for all families who are claiming it in the year 2021 must be under $150,000 for married filing joint households, under $75K for single filers, and that does include married filing separate as well, and then $112,500 actually for head of household filers. There are phase outs above these levels. When you get to be above that income level, the credit starts to phase out and reduce actually down to the initial, the ordinary base level of $2,000 per kid, and then from there, from $200,000 up to $4,000, it phases out completely. The 2021 tax year eligibility can be calculated using either 2020 records if someone has filed, or 2019 records if they have filed the previous year but not the current year for 2020. Okay. Children under 18 as of 12/31/2021 qualify for the credit. This is no longer a 17 inclusive, it's now 18 inclusive. So any child under 18 exclusive. So any child under the age of 18 as of the end of the tax year, 12/31/2021, can get the credit. The filer must have provided at least half of the child support throughout the tax year for 2020, and they had to have lived with the taxpayer or filer for at least half of the year, 6 months. And that is a very thin line. It is literally 184 days. If you have 2 parents that can claim it, whichever parent can demonstrate that they have the majority, the simple majority, 184 days, that is the parent that can claim the credit. Child also must have a valid social security number. So the following children can qualify for the tax credit. So this is all usually based on relationship. Your son or daughter, including an adopted child or foster child, can be claimed for this credit. Stepchildren, stepbrothers, and stepsisters, as long as they are younger than you, which is the key here, can be claimed for the credit. Obviously within those age ranges as well for the child tax credit. Half brothers and half sisters, again, as long as they are younger than you and falling within those age ranges, can also be used for the credit. Foster children, as I previously stated, grandchildren, nieces and nephews, and a direct descendant of any of the above, all can be claimed for the child tax credit. So as we said before, the IRS is planning to send out periodic payments beginning in July and lasting through December. All available resources and news suggest that it will be on a monthly basis. The IRS might not be able to commit to that, but right now we're planning for it to be dispersed on a monthly basis. Advocates and legislatures are hoping that these payments are going to be monthly, but we'll see how it goes, depending on what the IRS can or can't do. They're going to account for the last half of the year of 2021, and then the remainder of that credit will then be dispersed when you file for taxes in 2022 for the tax year 2021. Go ahead, see you next. You go next slide. And that's basically it for the child tax credit. If you guys have any questions for us about either the stimulus or the child tax credit, please feel free to ask them now.
All right. So I will say thank you for that, Taylor and Cecile. We have gotten a lot of questions. I'm going to start reading them out, and we will address them to the best of our abilities. Is everyone ready? The first question from Susan Mahalik, which I think is a really good question, is do people need to file by May 17th, which is the tax filing deadline? Does anyone want to take that?
All available evidence suggests that you want to get filed by then, keeping in mind that there's been some very quiet discussion that the IRS could again extend the deadline. We're not sure about that, how that's going to go. And also, if you wish to have an extension, you can't automatically file electronically for an extension that can give you until October 15th, I believe, to file for your tax returns. And everything about this credit suggests that as long as you file before the end of the tax year, you should be able to claim this credit.
I think I just want to add to that, because these payments are supposed to start in July. We don't know what's going to happen if you file, say, in September and try to, have the IRS retroactively give you these payments. We don't know what that process is going to be like, if it's going to be a complicated process or a simple process. So it's a safe bet that you should try to file before May 17th, so there's not any complications down the road with the IRS issuing retroactive payments for the July child tax credits.
Seal is absolutely right. The sooner you get into the system, the better. But in theory, you will have enough time to get into the system and get access to this credit in some way.
Now, this question, we might need a little bit more information, but this is generally a question is, Cecile and Taylor offered some information about how these benefits, one of the good points about it is that they are not being considered for as income for many public benefits. But we have a lot of questions about how various agencies are going to monitor when they become a resource. Because if you do get these stimulus payments, although it's not income, it shouldn't affect your SNAP, TANF, or SSI. If you hold it more than 12 months, it will be considered a resource. Now, I will start with this and just say, we've gotten a lot of questions about how does that work? And generally, this is more a public benefits question than a tax question, but for means tested programs where there are resource limits, each program has a maximum amount of money you can essentially have as resources. A lot of the agencies like Social Security monitor your bank account. So the resource limit for an individual to get SSI is $2,000. If 12 months from now, you have more than $2,000 in your bank account, you can no longer say it's from the stimulus, right? You probably could say that this is from getting that stimulus payment up until then, but they're not going to track each and every dollar. They're not going to say like this dollar came from the stimulus and this dollar came from something else. What they're going to look at is the amount of time that has passed since you got that money. They said you had 12 months to spend it. So if it's been more than 12 months and you continue to have more money in your account than you're allowed to, then it's going to become an issue. We got 3 or 4 questions about that. So I just wanted to put that out there. So another question we have, which I wanted to raise to the panel, is for those who have been claimed as dependents on tax returns after receiving the stimulus payments, is there a required repayment of funds?
No, full stop, no. There is no clawback provision that exists in the CARES Act or in the Second Recovery Act or even in the American Rescue Plan by which these payments can be taken back by the IRS. You can always write them a check if you want to, but there's absolutely no provision by which you can return these benefits. There's nothing that's set up for them to do so. They want this money to go out. That's what it's intended to happen.
Another question we received is, why are tax refunds being held up?
So, without knowing the particulars of anyone of the situation of whoever's asking the question, or who might be whoever the person is asking the question about, there's a lot of different reasons why this might be happening. If anyone did not receive stimulus checks in 2020 and is attempting to claim the recovery rebate credit on the 2020 tax return, the IRS is trying to reconcile those to make sure that that person did not receive any stimulus checks. So on the offhand chance that that person actually did receive one or both of them and either forgot or for whatever reason declined to put it on the tax return, they have to take that time to reconcile that. So I know that's a part of what's going on. There are other circumstances where if some people received unemployment, there might be a delay in them reconciling the changes to the based on the American Rescue Plan, where the reduction in what unemployment is subject to tax might be delaying that as well, but that's also an up in the air kind of thing too. Depending on the circumstances, there could be any number of reasons why there's a holdup for administration of refunds, because some people are getting them pretty quickly and some people are not. But those are just two examples of why they might be being held up.
Okay. Now, there were a few questions about what happens with dependent children in various situations. I don't know if Taylor's comments addressed this completely before, because some of these questions came in before he really talked, but one question was, in a case where a child lives in two households, has the government provided any guidance as to which parent should receive the EIP for that child?
Yeah, the bottom line fundamentally, to make it easy, is whoever has the most days wins. Okay, that's what's going to happen fundamentally. Whoever has the most days out of the year, the majority of the 12 months wins. So it can be 184 days versus 182, 184 wins. If it's 183, at that point, it becomes an income issue. Okay, and whichever parent has the largest income actually technically gets to claim the child first. Okay, so it can toss around depending on the circumstances. Fundamentally, both people cannot claim the same child for the child tax credit. There are certain circumstances where both people can claim the same child for earned income credit and not for the child tax credit, but that's where things start to get a little weedy. At the end of the day, whoever has the most days out of the year wins.
And just to add to that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, anyone, but if there was a situation where a child moved and perhaps the first parent got the EIP, even though the child is actually now with the second parent, you can file the 2020 taxes, seek a recovery rebate, and the IRS will do an audit to figure out who should get it. Isn't that correct?
So yes, what I was thinking about specifically is a circumstance where both parents might try to claim the same child, and at that point, if that return hits their system, whoever e-files first wins the e-file race. But that does not mean that the other parent cannot still file that return. What they will have to do then is mail that return in. They will still issue the money based on that claim, and then the IRS will eventually, and who knows how long it might take given their current staffing issues and the backup due to COVID, they will eventually audit both parents, and they will ask whichever one can prove that the child was with them for the majority of that year. They will ask for documents, records, school records, the healthcare records, all kinds of things, trying to determine where the child was for the majority of the year. Whoever wins that wins. Whoever loses that will have to pay back that credit with penalties and interest.
Now, we have a question about children who are estranged from their parents, live alone, not supported by their parents. Now, what advice do you have for those children? Those specifics in this example is someone who was 18 last year and 19 now, as far as all three payments.
What I would suggest, first off, for a kid who is 19 now, who was claimed by their parents or completely estranged, that sounds like they can actually claim themselves. If for whatever reason their parents still claimed them in the prior year, and that's why they did not get access to those checks, they can file a return now to get the recovery rebate credit for those two checks, which is up to $1,800 in their pockets right now. Filing that 2020 return will then allow them to have access automatically, eventually, to the $1,400 stimulus payment, EIP3. That will eventually come to whichever delivery system they selected, whether they ask for direct deposits or if they ask for a paper check, it will come to them as well. A lot of this can be shaky because depending on the circumstances and the discussions with their parents might still have access to these children's information, still be filing returns claiming them as dependents when that is not the case. At the end of the day, the child does have a remedy to file the return. They can file the return via paper if they wish and still eventually get the credit that way. They can also try to get an identity theft protection pin, an IP pin. That process might be easy or hard depending on the circumstances for the child. For children that age, what the IRS usually, or for people that age, IRS usually requires some kind of active credit account to verify their identity. And for children that age, it's usually not going to exist. So there might be another mechanism by which they will create that for them. But if you can get an IP pin to protect your information from being used by anyone else as a dependent on the return, that child can also do that as well. And you can go to the irs.gov website and research Get IP PIN, and they will walk you through the process on how to get a PIN.
Okay. So we're getting a lot of very specific questions. We're going to get through as many as we can, but we do need to get to the next part of the presentation, some of which will be addressed by this. One question that I want to raise from Susan Pultman is, what is the easiest and cheapest way for someone to file taxes if they haven't done so before and have no earnings? Well, we are about to get to that. The best way to do that is to connect to your virtual VITA or your VITA, which in the Philadelphia region is Campaign for Working Families. And we're going to talk about several ways to do that. And this is Graham's world. So he's going to make sure we have a lot of information about the best ways to do that. Briefly, for someone who's receiving Social Security, what documents do they need to file a return? We're also about to discuss this. In general, you just need to prove your identity, and you should be that should be enough to file your documents. You need basically an ID and some sort of documentation verifying your Social Security number, but you won't need to have a lot of documents in order to file for the most part. Another question that I want to address quickly is why have some people received the first IEP but didn't receive the second or third? A few things. The third stimulus payment is still being sent out. There's been a lot of reporting. There's been a lot of delays. So people who haven't received that payment might still be receiving it. They haven't issued all of them. Some of them have been sent out by mail. So just know that those are still going out. Separately, though, the first two stimulus payments have been completely sent out. There are different income eligibility for each one, which could indicate why someone's receiving different amounts. There's also been just a lot of errors and problems. So it may be for just very random reasons why maybe you got the first stimulus, but maybe your second stimulus got sent to some tax filing agency or something. There's been all sorts of different problems that would make it so it's not going to get to you. So if you didn't receive it, don't assume that that is correct, right? If you didn't receive it, our advice is to go ahead, file taxes, try to request it through the recovery rebate, because it's probably some sort of weird glitch and you're likely owed it. So I'm going to keep putting all these questions aside, but I want to make sure we get through the next part. One I want to raise up because I think it's really important is one posted about what happens to newly arrived refugee families. Will they be able to access the child tax credit? So this goes to a lot of different, this is actually a really important point I want to raise. If anybody who has a Social Security number should have access to the stimulus and the child tax credits. How exactly that access is going to work, particularly with the expanded child tax credit, we don't really know now. We know that you're entitled to this money, and if you file taxes, you should be able to get this money if you file by May in advance payments if you want. Ideally starting in July, though, as Taylor indicated, there's no commitment necessarily that it'll start in July or exactly how frequently those advance payments will go out. If you haven't received it, you will be able to claim it in taxes for 2021 next year. But so our advice for almost all of these questions is, if in doubt, get people to file taxes this year, because that's the best way to get access to these benefits. And at this point, I'm gonna, if Cecile, you wouldn't mind advancing the slides, I'm gonna talk a little bit about how to do that. So, connecting people to free tax filing assistance. Now, I know I gave a little bit of this pep talk at the beginning, but I want to say it again. None of the systems we have currently in place are designed to help lots of people who don't traditionally file taxes. That's just not how anything was set up. That's not how VITA and Campaign for Working Families was set up, as Graham will acknowledge. That's not how the IRS is set up. They're set up to deal with tax filers. And there isn't really any natural assistance in place to make this happen. So the reason we are talking to you now about how to do this today is we need people to assist anyone that they meet get into the tax system, because lots of people have so far been left out and lots of people will continue to be left out if this assistance isn't made available. Next slide. So, as I was just saying, we are advising everyone to encourage everyone to file in 2021. It is the only way that you can get missing stimulus payments, and we know millions of people are missing stimulus payments. We also believe it will help people access the expanded child tax credit in advance. And as a reminder, the deadline is May 17th. Now, you know, many low-income people are not used to filing taxes. Some are not able to file free online tax services like Credit Karma, TaxSlayer, TurboTax. A lot of people believe that they cannot file taxes. There's lots of myth busting that needs to happen. And the IRS is not a social service entity, and they don't have the bandwidth right now to help people file taxes. They just don't. So other people need to get involved. Next slide. So free help is available. The largest form of free help is the volunteer income tax assistance, which is the primary free tax assistance available. It traditionally usually happens in person, but obviously due to the pandemic, most of it needs to be virtual this year. Next slide. So in this area, the main VITA is Campaign for Working Families. Again, this is Graham, and they are using a website that was created by Code for America called getyourrefund.org that is allowing people to connect virtually to free tax preparation services through VITA. This is a really, really cool website that really is innovating how to do this from home. Now, we are recommending that people in this area, if they're looking for virtual VITA assistance, that they do go to Campaign for Working Families website, which will refer them to the getyourrefund.org portal if you request virtual tax assistance with help. Next slide. I want to show you this process because this is part of why we need people to get involved. So usually when people go to get virtual services, the first two boxes, which says client answer questions and get your refund and securely upload photo IDs, that is actually like what we are asking you to do today. So in order to sign up for virtual tax assistance, people have to go online, they have to fill out 20 or more questions and upload certain documents. They need to upload a picture of their ID, a selfie holding their ID, so we can, confirm the person and the ID matched, and some sort of documentation verifying their social security or ITIN number. That is simple for some, but it's really hard for many. It requires digital literacy. It requires access to the internet. It requires a computer. It requires some sort of technology like a phone or a tablet that can take photos, an email. It requires an email address and a phone number. This is way too much for many of the people we work with at Community Legal Services, and I imagine that many of you work with in the field. Next slide. So we are asking you to do those two first boxes of help to help people get in line for help. Now, the reason I wanted to show you that chart, though, is there's many other steps in the process. And that means that your assistance is needed to refer people for help. As I said, you need all of these things here: access to device, email address, questions. Next slide. But it's not tax preparation. After you do that, an intake specialist will go over what you submitted and make sure that the person you assisted submitted all the right stuff. And then it goes to a tax expert to prepare the tax return and subsequently a quality review process. So perfect does not need to be the enemy of the good here. People can answer these questions to the best of their ability, and tax preparers with expertise in doing taxes will double check your work. So although some of these questions, they feel like a tax return, it is not tax preparation. People do not need to worry about stepping into the shoes of a tax preparer. All we are doing is helping people fill out an online form that they otherwise would have been asked to fill out themselves. So if you think about it like this, there's a lot of what social workers, caseworkers, attorneys, lots of people, constituent service, how people do fill out other forms every day. This is a very, very similar process. And please know that this is not tax preparation. The IRS does not view this as tax preparation. You should feel comfortable filling this form. And I appreciate that Graham is nodding to reaffirm this because I know that is something that weighs on a lot of organizations' minds, is whether or not helping people will inadvertently make them tax preparers. It won't. This is not tax preparation. This is helping your client get in line. Next slide. So to do this intake, you need every time I've done this intake for my clients, I ask them to do a few things in advance to make sure they can do it. They need a photo ID. It can be expired, but they need the photo ID. They need to be able to take a picture of it and send it to you. And if they can't, we need to, go out to them and help them take a picture of it. You need a selfie with the ID. I'm going to show you a picture of what this looks like. The client needs to have some sort of way to verify their social security number or ITIN card. Any document from Social Security with the name and social security number is enough. It doesn't have to be the social security card if your client doesn't have it. And then the getyourrefund.org is pretty nifty. If the answer to some of the questions indicated that you might need a W-2 or 1099 or something, it'll tell you. However, if your client or the person you're assisting doesn't have it, you can also say you don't have it right now, and they'll still be able to get in line, and perhaps they'll have more time to look around for those documents. The getyourrefund.org site will ask a dozen typical tax filing questions. It really reminded me of doing my own TurboTax. Every time I did it, these tend to be pretty straightforward questions. And again, even it's okay if you answer a question wrong every once in a while. An actual tax expert will look at this after you and talk to the person you're working with and make sure it's answered correctly. And I've included a really helpful link here. Code for America has a really good overview of the process, which I highly recommend pulling up before you start this with someone. Next slide. Now, these are some of the pictures that I got from Code for America website. It's just to kind of show you what these questions are like. One thing I want to note is getyourrefund.org will allow people through VITA to file for up to 4 years of tax returns. But if the person you're working with does not have income and is doing this mostly to get stimulus or an access to the child tax credit, they only need to file the 2020. They don't need to mess with any of the prior returns. So keep it simple, keep it moving, 2020, move it on. Next slide. So the middle picture there, the person holding the ID, that's what the selfie is supposed to look like. I imagine I saw a question pop up about whether the person could be masked. I think they probably can't be masked in this selfie, but perhaps if you were to be in person, if you could do it 6 feet away, it would work, just because the point of the selfie is so that whoever's looking at this on their computer can verify that the ID matches. But I guess perhaps depending on what their face looks like, maybe it could work. But so if this is mobile enabled, people can do it on their phone. And if you do it on your phone, it's pretty easy to upload the documents and the picture pretty seamlessly. Next slide. So I think I discussed before is, getyourrefund.org will help you collect the documents, tell you what you need, give you a list of what's there when you submit it. Next slide. And at the end of it, it will ask some information that's helpful if you can include. You need to include information like a mailing address. If your client would like to get their refund automatically as quickly as possible, it is recommended that they put in their banking information, but that's only if the person you're working with is comfortable giving you that information. Otherwise, they can get it sent to them. And another thing that's really helpful to point out is everybody, in order to do this, you need to have an email address. At least the people that community legal services work at frequently don't have email addresses. And so one of the things that you can do to really help the person you're working with is to create that email address. Several of these tax systems that the IRS has created so far, including the non-filer portal from last summer, required people to go ahead and create email addresses. So if you can, one of the services you can really do is to create that email address, because I think this will be a reoccurring problem. And someone asked me in the past if there's any recommendations about what email. I don't know. I always make people Gmail accounts. I don't think it really matters. But if other people have thoughts, I'm open to them. Next slide. Now, pain points. I just mentioned the email addresses. A lot of people don't have email addresses, and you need that to use the system. So we're hoping that people will work with the people they're working with. Two other issues that come up frequently is if someone has a history of identity theft, they need a special PIN to file. That PIN is supposed to be sent out every year, and it may be, but a lot of, at least the people we work with, they move a lot. They don't have these PINs, and they're very hard to recover. In order to recover them automatically, you typically need to be able to verify like credit information, like a mortgage or a credit card, which a lot of our clients don't have. So if you run into that issue, we're still trying to look to find the appropriate person that can help people with this problem. So for now, if you call Community Legal Services in the Philadelphia area, we're going to try to create a resource to help people recover these PINs, because it's a really big issue. Similarly, you need to have a social security number or ITIN to use this process. If someone does not have an ITIN, people should consider connecting them to resources to assist them in seeking one for free. There are a lot of agencies that will charge a lot of money for this service, but it can be done free through the IRS website. So connecting people to resources in order to get these ITINs is going to be really important. Next slide. Now, Graham may be able to answer more questions about this, but another pain point in this process is getting people to complete the process. As I mentioned, good news, people who help their clients sign up for virtual VITA are not tax preparers. The downside of that is they are going to need to talk to tax preparers throughout this process. There's usually 1 to 2 follow-up calls. And if the client does not complete the call, Campaign for Working Families and virtual VITA in general cannot file their taxes. So it can be really helpful if you can stay involved and make sure your client does complete this process. And I thought typically, anytime there's a follow-up call, it comes from the same number. So I'm going to give everybody this number, and I want you to know it. But if somebody is going to follow up with your client about the intake or at the end of the process of the quality review before filing taxes, they're always going to call from 650-449-4147. 650-449-4147. I'm also going to put it in the chat. I think this is really important because we want to make sure the people we help get in line for tax assistance actually get their taxes filed. So, next slide. I want to also note that people do not have to go through a virtual process to get assistance with tax filing. If you go to Campaign for Working Families, they also detail 2 other ways to help people file taxes. One is if you want to do it yourself, the website will direct you to free tax filing websites. I want to note that if you have a 1099, you might have to pay a small fee for that, though, and you should let people know if that's the route they want to take. You can also have in-person appointments. The in-person appointments are not completely in person. Usually you set up an appointment, the client has to go drop off forms, and someone will call them to go over it. So it does mimic a lot of the same things as the virtual. Clients cannot wait at the location, and it will, still require them to pick up the return phone calls and make sure they're going through it. Next slide. But the in-person appointments, are ideal for some clients who are struggling with things like photographing their IDs. In this case, they can just, drop them off to be photocopied for them. and who are pretty mobile in their communities, but otherwise lack digital access. It can also be really ideal for clients, with limited English proficiency. The virtual service does use interpreters, but for some people who are familiar with their community and would rather do it in person, that is better. Next slide. So before we get to questions, the one last thing I will note is if you are helping someone with this virtual sign-up process, there is also a box for notes at the end. As Graham will note, you can use this liberally. If I'm ever working with a client who needs an interpreter, that's where that information goes. If there's some issue that the client told me that I wasn't sure what to do with, I put it in the comment box, because that will go to the intake specialist and the tax preparer and give, and let them make a reasoned judgment about what to do with that information. So with all of that, we're going to start. I know people have been answering questions. I'm going to start going through and see what questions still need to be answered. So one question that I think is important is Laura Handel asked, does Campaign for Working Families serve Delaware County residents?
This year we do virtually. So right now we actually will serve anyone in Pennsylvania or New Jersey, and every once in a while from other states, people come through and we will take care of them as well. This year we do not have any in-person sites in Delaware County because of COVID, because we weren't able to secure any there, but we usually do have at least 1 or 2 sites in Delaware County. But if the person can, some of our sites in West Philadelphia are, as close as you could get to Delaware County.
When someone is trying to get suppose you have children but did not use or receive the child tax credit on your taxes, will you be able to receive the expanded child credit payments? Taylor, you are on mute if you are answering that question. You are still on mute.
Unmute. I'm sorry. There we go. I apologize, everyone. Not only would you be able to claim the credit, what I'm actually curious about is if for prior years you were not claiming the credit, I would be curious as to why, and you might want to look into potentially getting those years amended as well. But the short answer should be almost certainly yes.
And just to chime in here, Campaign for Working Families, we can do amendments and we can file people's tax returns up to 4 years in the past. So.
This is a good question that kind of goes back to tax filing in general. When someone is trying to get the earned income child tax credit, do they have to indicate that when they file their taxes, or once an individual files their taxes, will they receive the child tax credit if their family qualifies?
The short answer is yes. A lot of this is essentially automated, with the caveat that unless you want to be, the process will automatically go through and you'll be able to be determined you're eligible for the child tax credit, and it should go through without a problem. For the most part, unless you're doing completely free fileable forms, which doesn't have a lot of the math and the equations built into it, it should go through without a problem. You should be assessed for the child tax credit, and to be quite honest, because there's no earnings floor, anyone filing a return with qualifying kids should get it.
Okay. Is the $3,000 per child per month or quarter?
So it's $3,000 for the year. So let me start there. $3,000 for the year for the children between the ages of 6 and 17, $3,600 for the year for children between birth and 6. What will happen is what has happened is that they have not determined the delivery system yet, or how often they will be delivering the credit. All indications right now point to monthly, but that might not be something the IRS can actually commit to. It might be a quarterly situation, which would in theory just be 2 times at the end of this year. We're still kind of staying tuned on that, but it could be monthly, which would be $300 per month per kid for the rest of the year.
Now, this is a question I think is important to highlight, and it is, if you are receiving public benefits like SSI, TANF, do you have to file a non-filer tax return? And what I would say is we are recommending you do, because even though Social Security Administration is sending stimulus payments automatically to people who receive Social Security benefits, for example, they don't always have all the information about the dependents that you have, whether they're children or for the third stimulus, adult dependents. And that also means that if you have a child for whom you would be eligible for this extended child tax credit, they're not going to know about that, and you're not going to be in the tax system. You know, there may be another way for people to get in that system. So we either recommend people either use the non-filer portal for last year, but we still recommend filing a return for this year, just to make sure that IRS has all the information that they need to make sure that you have access to these benefits as soon as possible.
Can I jump in here too, real quick on that, Jen?
Yep.
Yeah. The non-filers tool was essentially a tax return in the first place. That was a a piece of that situation that was relatively quiet, kept relatively quiet because the IRS didn't really want to admit that they had to create that process. But that's what then actually ended up happening. When you are filing a return for 2020, it essentially will be a non-filer's return if you don't have any income that requires you to file. At the end of the day, there is no distinction anymore. When you're filing for 2020, you're just filing a return. However it needs to get filed, that's it.
Okay. Now, somebody raised an important issue, which is that a big concern is that the CTC should go directly to the mother or the primary caregiver, but, you know, that there may be an issue if non-primary caregivers file first. That is a concern, and that is something that's being raised repeatedly on the Hill with lobbyists and lawmakers. It is unclear as of now exactly what the process is going to be to make sure that primary caregivers get access to the CTC, but I know it's being considered. Unless Taylor or Graham, anyone's heard anything different, my understanding is that issue has been raised. It's an important one to raise, but I think is still being considered.
I'm sorry to step on you, Graham. How as it stands right now, there is essentially a process by which that gets dealt with. And basically, if you as the custodial parent get basically beaten to the punch by the other person who has access to that child's information and you are not able to e-file the return, that does not mean you cannot file the return. What you will then have to do is then in theory file a paper return. You will have to mail it in. Given the issues that the IRS is having with trying to recover from the closings due to COVID last year, there's a lot of mail that they'll have to sift through, and it will delay your receipt of the return, of the refund rather, but you will get your refund, your child tax credit refund, based on that return when you mail it in. What will then eventually happen is the IRS will send out basically an audit to both parties. And both parties will have to prove who actually is able to claim the child for the year. Whoever cannot do it will have to pay back that credit with interest and penalties. So it will eventually happen, and it doesn't mean you are not completely disqualified from doing it. It only really means that whoever e-filed and beat you to the punch means they will get theirs first. You will get yours eventually. You'll just have to file a paper return. And then when that audit process finally does happen, you just have to be prepared to provide the appropriate documentation.
Yes, so that is speaking about what happens with the CTC now. I don't think we know what's going to happen with the expanded CTC.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
Other
yeah.
issues.
Right.
So this is a good one. Would a parent be eligible for a child tax credit for their unborn child? And maybe this is a good time to talk about at what point your child becomes eligible for the credit. I know that there's lots of jokes about inductions.
I shouldn't laugh at that. I'm sorry. Basically, whenever the child is born is when that child becomes eligible. So if you have a child that is born at all during 2021, there will almost certainly be a reconciliation process that will be available on the 2021 tax return when we have to file in 2022. what's happening right now is filing for 2020 year tax returns. So any child that was not born in 2020 will not be eligible until next year. Like you'll be any child that's born in 2021, you will be able to actually reconcile that and file for that child in 2022 for the tax year 2021.
Okay, this is an important question that I think we should confirm. Just to confirm, you do not need to earn any income to get the CTC, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Or
correct.
the stimulus payments?
There is no earnings floor. This credit is fully refundable and fully available for anyone with qualifying dependents, period. So no earnings are necessary. No taxable earnings are necessary or required to get these credits.
Okay. Now, if there is an 18-year-old full-time student, is there any reason why they wouldn't have qualified for the first two stimulus payments?
In short, the parent probably claimed them. That's the shortest, quickest answer I can give. Is that it's more than likely that either the parent probably claimed them or some other individual who had access to that person's information claimed them, or what is also possible is that if there was no one else that claimed them, that person did not exist in the tax system, and as such, they would not have gotten those checks if there were no available tax records for them in tax year 18 or tax year 19. If they are available. If they have taxable income in 20 or not, right? If they just exist in 20, they can go ahead and file a return in 2020 and actually use the recovery rebate credit to get those two checks, to get the $1,200 and the $600. Oh, it is. Jen, your speaker went out.
Sorry. Yeah.
There we go. Okay.
Yep. Sorry. We got another question. I don't know if it was satisfied by subsequent comments, but about what happens if a non-custodial parent got the stimulus payments. As Taylor mentioned before, there are ways for the custodial parent to file taxes this year in 2020, request the recovery rebate, and try to seek those payments. Now, there's a question about whether we are advising people to file a trace if somebody didn't get their missing EIPs.
Mm-hmm.
Our recommendation is no, just file your taxes and request the recovery rebate.
Mm-hmm.
And Graham is nodding,
Yeah,
so I'm guessing that is.
Yeah, as long as it's this year, we can file you another tax return or we could file you the first one or even an amendment, but the trace program is not set up to find the stimulus right now.
Yeah.
So another question, which kind of goes to the sequencing, is so if you just filed your 2020 taxes and use the recovery rebate to seek 1 and 2, how do you get stimulus 3?
Essentially, you wait.
Yeah, your tax return will trigger it.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know how long that will take. It's since it's happening right now, we're all still learning how long that's going to take.
Mm-hmm. But you filing in 2020 and getting connection to those other two credits, if you did not receive them, you will get connected to that third payment.
Now, somebody asked if the client already filed their 2020 return, did not request a recovery rebate, but are missing stimulus, do they have any recourse? I believe they do for a couple of years.
Yes, so we could file an amendment right now, or we could file an amendment in any of the next few years, letting you know. Yep, it is. I'll just say that if that does happen, the amendments are going to take an unknown amount of time.
Right.
Usually they're about a 2-month process in the kind of the IRS's best case scenario, which I've never seen it just be 2 months, but this year it's even longer.
Right. Absolutely.
But that's not to dissuade anyone from doing it. It's just to set some realistic expectations with your client.
Yes.
It is going to take us some time.
And let me also say for the record, if you discover that is the case, you want to get that amendment done as soon as possible. What I'm actually curious about, and I don't mean to necessarily put a bug in on this, but I'm curious as to how they will interpret the CARES Act provisions with the stimulus checks. In theory, the stimulus checks eligibility for them stops at the end of this calendar year, 12/31/2021. I wonder if they will allow for people to claim amended returns and also allow for the refund statute expiration date to be connected to that. Because technically, as long as you file a return and the IRS owes you money, you can file that return within 3 years of the original due date and still have them pay you. I assume that refund statute expiration will also connect to the CARES Act, to the stimulus payments, but you never know with these people.
We've gotten a few questions about plus up payments. Can somebody explain what a plus up payment is?
I've actually never heard that term before.
Or I'm happy to take it. So my understanding
I haven't heard it either. Go ahead. I have never heard about it either.
So if you got stimulus payments, the stimulus payments were sent out as automatically as possible. And as a result, many of the payments were initially sent out based on 2018 or 2019 returns. So the first one was 2018, 2019. The second one was 2019 and 2020. So let's take this year. Your first stimulus was based off your 2018 tax return. You may have had in 2019 tax returns. That's pre-pandemic world. So it's very possible for many, many people that their financial circumstances in those years were very, very different than they were this year.
No, I got it. Okay.
So when you file your 2020 return, as we're advising that every person should do, if the IRS learns that you would have been eligible for a bigger stimulus payment than you received for the first or second, they will send you a plus up payment to make up the difference. So yet another reason why you should go ahead, and even if you don't realize you're missing stimulus, you might automatically get additional stimulus. So look out for weird cards and weird checks in the mail or additional deposits for the IRS. My understanding is we have zero idea how long it will take for you to get those payments, but the IRS has until December 31st, 2021. So anytime this year. Okay. Okay, this is a good question as far as advice. We mentioned that some people will need ITINs in order to file their taxes, which means that some people need to go seek ITINs and wait to get the ITIN in order to file. Is there any advice about what people should do? Should they be filing for an extension, or is it possible they will just be able to file later while they're waiting for their ITINs to come?
Again, with the caveat that I'm wondering whether or not the IRS will allow for the refund statute expiration date to be connected to the EIP access. The sooner you work on getting your ITIN, the better. As a general rule, most of the things that I know about the ITIN acquisition process come from like the private market. There are people called certified acceptance agents, CAAs, whose job it is to go and petition the IRS for ITINs. There's a form that you fill out called a W-7 that any undocumented person can fill out in theory themselves and request for the ITIN. But there are people out there that can help them steward and shepherd them through that process. I'm not sure how long it takes typically to get the ITIN, but it probably would be a good idea to file an extension just to be sure that you have enough time to get everything done. But again, in theory, all payments, all EIPs, particularly the ones for this year, the third status payment, do have to be dispersed by 12/31/2021. So in theory, the sooner you do it, the better. Absolutely.
Somebody, oh, Graham, you're typing an answer to that. That's great. So would anyone be able to talk about tax offset liability and how that interacts with stimulus payments?
I can speak to it anecdotally, which might not be the best situation, but I can tell you that what I've seen recently. Let me start from the beginning. Initially, what was told, what the IRS told us as taxpayers and as professionals is that the recovery rebate credit would actually be used to offset any tax liability that existed in 2020. Okay. And that's the way most software was set up, and that's the way most software was processing. And if the person had a tax liability for 2020 without the recovery rebate credit and they did not receive stimulus checks for whatever reason in 2020, that those stimulus checks that they did not receive would be used to offset their tax liability. So for example, if someone owed $450, they didn't receive the second stimulus check, they would use the $600 would be used to offset that $450, they would get $150 back. But what I've been seeing lately, and it's very interesting to me, is that the IRS has actually been just straight giving out those checks that people did not get and just providing them with a bill if there was a balance due, which is fascinating to me. They're also not even using refunds without regard to recovery rebate credits to offset any past due liability for anyone that might have tax debt prior to 2020. This is a brave new world, and the IRS, I think, is really trying to be kinder and gentler because of COVID. So that's what I've been seeing lately are folks that even have past due liabilities that without any regard for the stimulus checks and refunds without any regards for the stimulus checks get the full amount of the refund and just a notification that they stole the IRS money. So that's what I've seen. I don't know if anyone else has seen anything to the contrary, but that's what seems to be happening right now is that the IRS is no longer even using those recovery rebate credits to offset tax liability in the current year or even in prior years. They're just giving it out.
My understanding is that's the policy. Now I want to raise something up that I know Cecilia you were answering, but it was a question about incarcerated people because it was something that was confusing. Initially, the IRS said that people would not receive stimulus if they were incarcerated. There were some really big lawsuits out of California and Chicago, and the IRS had to change their position. So people who are incarcerated are eligible for stimulus payments. Most of them did not get them. It's very hard to file taxes in jail. It is. It's hard to even send somebody tax documents in jail. So if you have a loved one or someone you work with or are helping people who are incarcerated, please know that this is a huge issue. There is massive missing stimulus payments that are owed to folks who are incarcerated. And the best way they can get missing stimulus payments is to file a 2020 return and hooking them up with help to get it. And that will help get the third one processed as well as their family access to the child tax credit if they have dependents, which I guess would depend upon whether they are released at this point in a position to have qualifying dependents under the tax code. Now, so there's a question here, which I think is helpful because this has also changed throughout the life of these stimulus payments, which is about the Social Security requirement for IEPs, particularly with families who have Social Security numbers and immigration documents. I know you addressed this in your presentation, Cecil, but can you talk a little bit about the immigration eligibility for stimulus payments?
Yeah, I'm reading the question, and I think the question is a bit more focused. The question asked if their immigration documents expired, so they had a work permit and it expired, would they be eligible still for the EIPs that are issued when the documents have already expired? That is a good question. I'm not sure if their documents were valid during the first two EIPs, and obviously they would get the first EIPs 1 and 2, but if it expired for the third one, and the third one is based on 2019, 2020 tax returns. Taylor, do you know anything about this? If you have expired documents? You're on mute, Taylor.
it's interesting because the way I interpret that is that the social itself might be expired for work purposes, but the social itself still also might be active. So as such, I don't see why that person still couldn't use the social to file the return and get the access to the payments. But I got to be honest, that is pure conjecture. I am not certain about that. That's something we would have to research.
Okay. Now, there was a question, and I'm moving from the questions to the chat about the process to connect to Campaign for Working Families, about whether leading through the person through questions is done virtually or do you meet the client by Zoom? I think it depends. I know in my situation, I have done it virtually many times, and I just have the client email me their documents and upload them. I know other people at CLS have had to go to certain clients' homes to help them find the documents and take pictures. So I think you can at least start virtually and see if something comes up that needs to be addressed in another way. There's a question about whether or not the CTC, the expanded CTC, needs to be an advanced payment. Some people don't want that. What I will say again about that is it is unclear at this time how this is going to work. The IRS is directed to make advanced payments available. My understanding is there's widespread belief that there should be an opt-out, so you might be able to take it all at the end of the year if you want to.
Yep.
But again, we don't know exactly how this is going to work. But I do not think you're automatically going to have to get it in advance. Okay. Okay, we got a question about somebody getting custody of a child in 2020. Will that give that person access to the stimulus and the CTC for 2021? I think per Taylor's excellent presentation, you have to have the child for 6 months. So if you've had the child in 2021, you should get it. Will these credits be available in the future? We don't know.
Right.
We don't know.
Right.
But we really hope they are. So please talk to your congresspeople and senators and promote making the advanced child tax credit permanent. I think it'll be a big discussion this year.
Yeah, any change to this will have to happen in separate legislation, because this particular credit was placed in the American Rescue Plan, and it's just for this year. So anything after that will require separate legislation. Just like Jen said, petition your congresspeople, however you need to do to get out to let them know that this is something you want ongoing.
So I know we talked about this earlier, but there was a question about how to file a tax return for SSI and SSDI participants. I think we mentioned this a little bit. Graham would prefer it if you help them file, but only file for 2020.
Yes,
sign up
there's
to
no
file
reason
for 2020.
Yeah, there's no reason to go back and do multiple years. And just so everybody, peek into our process, if someone says that they have 3 or 4 years, it's going to hold up our processing of the return until we investigate that they either do or do not need those other 3 years. So if someone is filing just for the stimulus, unless you're very clear that this person hasn't been filing taxes and has been working for a number of years, just select 2020.
Okay. Now, Graham, is there anything else you would like everyone here to know about best practices when trying to sign people up to get assistance from Campaign for Working Families?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I would say is, one, thank you for helping people do this. But also, right now it's taking us about anywhere from 7 to 10 business days to fully process someone through our system. And I'll be honest, sometimes there's outliers there if we need to ask for more documentation. So I only say that to say if your client does get into the system, if you don't hear from someone right away, that's normal. We make sure that we answer every new message that comes in within 3 business days, but it can take us up to 10 business days or sometimes even longer to actually take the whole thing through the process and then actually have their return filed. The other thing I would just say is that until we have the 2 phone calls for folks, with the intake phone call and the quality review phone call, and then we get them to sign the return electronically, we can't even file the return. So I think the answer is, if you ask your client, oh, hey, did they call you? Did you talk to them once or twice? Make sure it's twice, because if not, right now we have a lot of returns that are that sit. And this happens every year, but we find that clients, they came in, they worked with us either in person, they worked with us virtually. They figured that one time that they signed their return with us in front of us was it. But unfortunately, we can't file the return until we've talked to them twice. So please make sure that they do that.
Okay. Well, thank you to everyone. Since it seems like there is not more questions in the chat. Thank you for everyone who has joined. We'll stay on for another minute or two to see if people add additional questions. One thing I want to note is the getyourrefund.org is the website that's being used to connect people to virtual VITAs all over the country. So while we're working specifically with our regional virtual VITA, if you are not from the Pennsylvania area, this information is still helpful for how to connect people virtually with your local VITA.
I will throw in one more thing. Thanks for reminding me of that. Is if you want your client to work specifically with Campaign for Working Families, have them go to the address I've put in the chat a few times, but I'll do it again, which is cwphilly.org/virtual. This will take them through to get your refund through a custom link that will make sure that then their information is routed to us here at Campaign for Working Families. If they just go to getyourrefund.org and fill out the information, if they have a Philadelphia zip code, chances are they're going to get to Campaign for Working Families, but it's not a guarantee. It could be shunted to another Pennsylvania organization, which they're all just as good. They're all VITA organizations. We're actually the coalition lead for about 8 different organizations across the state. But if you want them specifically to work with Campaign, make sure that they go to cwphilly.org/virtual.
We got one more question. I think that was asked before. What about people who just filed taxes for the first time to get EIP 1 and 2? How do they get EIP 3? And I think maybe Taylor or someone else already addressed this. So if you file taxes to get EIP 1 and 2, you will be in the system to get EIP 3. EIP 3 is still being sent out, but the IRS, they have like a rolling eligibility. So they're going to go through all the tax filings and send EIP 3 sometime down the road, hopefully sooner, better than later.
Now, I just noticed there was also a question about what to do if you're looking for your third stimulus payment and the "where's my payment" tool is not working. And unfortunately, the advice is just wait. And if you haven't filed your 2020 taxes, maybe file it, because it may be that they're missing some information, and when you file it, it'll trigger it to send it out.
Yeah, if you go to the Get My Payment and it says payment status unavailable, that just means they haven't sent out the stimulus payment. So it doesn't mean that they've rejected it or anything. So if you see it says payment status unavailable, that just means they haven't sent it out. If they have sent it out, they'll say, mailed out to an address, or they'll say deposit it, and they'll usually give you like the last 3 or 4 digits of the bank account that was deposited into. But if it says status unavailable, it just means they haven't sent it out, and just keep checking, later on to see if they update it.
Yep.
And then there was a question about, do people have to pay back the unemployment supplement for 2020? I believe that
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, the unemployment supplement, that might be a situation that you might have to deal with the Department of Labor and Industry about. Otherwise, there's no mechanism there that the IRS would have to be engaged in. But if I'm understanding the question, there is an unemployment disregard of up to $10,200 as far as tax filing is concerned. that is going to happen automatically via the IRS. So if you've already filed a return and that was not taken into account, the IRS will start adjusting those returns in May. But as far as the unemployment compensation supplement that came from the federal government, if there's a payback provision for that, will probably come from the Department of Labor Industry in Pennsylvania or wherever you are in the state or in the country, rather. Excuse me.
And then there's a question for Graham about what's the history of Campaign for Working Families? You know, how are you guys in a position to do all of this work?
Well, we've worked in the Philadelphia area for about the last 18 years. We've been our own nonprofit since 2016, before we were with the Urban Affairs Coalition. You know, it's anybody can become a VITA provider as long as you're willing to meet the requirements that the IRS puts out. We receive our funding from a lot of different sources, from the IRS itself, some from state sources, some from local government, and some from private foundations, like most organizations that are probably on this call. And how we got to work with getyourrefund.org is they put out a call last March, right when the pandemic started, saying, hey, we had this really small pilot of 4 organizations that are trying to do this virtual VITA thing. You know, being that everybody has to shut their doors, we're trying to open up this pilot. We started working with them last year, and that's how we did it. They then opened it up from 20 organizations last year to about 50 this year, and they just selected us to work with them because we've been doing that. Yeah, but then I see that question actually had something to do about a contract. There's no contract involved. Get Your Refund is not paying us. We're not paying them. The Code for America, I believe, is being funded for this through a few grants on the national level.
Okay, and I think, let me just take one more look. Who can contact if you would like to hold a virtual meeting for this presentation? As Caitlin mentioned, we're going to put this presentation up on YouTube and other places, which, you know, it's free and out there for anyone to use at any point. Okay, so if without anything else, you know, I just want to thank everyone for coming. You know, we're so pleased you're here and showing interest in how to help people connect to tax infrastructure this year. It's so important. You know, stimulus payments and the expanded child tax credit, it just represents so much money and relief for people in this area. And so, you know, we really hope you're able to use this information to help people sign up for virtual tax assistance and other tax appointments with Campaign for Working Families. Have a good day.